Right, well, nice to see you here, and it's nice to introduce to you. Are you Dr. Adam Gorb?
No, nothing like that, no.
I always write Dr. Adam Gorb when I'm sending you letters because I think the postman deliver things more quickly than they do Doctor on the basis it might be important.
Yeah.
Of course, it's much more important when you're dealing with musical matters than medical ones. Anyway, who or what is Adam Gorb? Adam Gorb is, I was saying, has made and established a considerable name for himself in at least one area of musical life. How many people have you how many of you here have actually come across a piece of Adam's in concert? Oh, well, that's good. That, on a national basis, we exceed the norm, I would say. Anyway, who is Adam Gorb? He is a composer, quite an influential composer in one at least two areas, in academic and indeed in woodband circles, though that's not where his entire output lies. He's not easily pigeonholed as far as fashions go either. He's an individual voice in music, and his voice, I think, is a product of following his musical ideas. He's not what I would call an existential composer, of whom there are many, who decides what his voice is and then imposes that upon the ideas. I'd also say he's a seat-of-the-pants composer whose music is driven by ideas and not one whose ideas are shaped by outside intellectual considerations. Do you think that's fair?
Oh, I like that, yes.
Oh, right. Yeah. The result is he's impervious to musical fashion. You won't see him reflecting any of the sort of angst trends or dumbing-down trends or easily listening trends or indeed intellectually challenging trends of contemporary British music. I think I'm cutting this short because we haven't got so much time. My assessment of his style is he manages to combine what I might call unpatronising accessibility with expressive power. That is to say, you can write music which people can follow and understand and enjoy without patronising them, and you can communicate whilst not losing a legitimate contemporary voice. And I think this is what Adam's music says to me. The result is, to say, he's impervious to musical fashion, and like, shall we say, Hindemith, it's impossible to be influenced by him without actually just copying him. Another result of this is a very large and rather bewildering richness of styles that we find in music. And I hope we have time to illustrate this with a number of pieces. And a sort of richness from piece to piece, and overall the overall catalogue as a whole. He's active in orchestral music and chamber music and choral music and vocal music. Everything, in fact, until, am I allowed to mention opera? Everything except opera, but this may change shortly. Let's approach him biographically. Adam, you were born in Cardiff. I don't think you're an ethnic Welshman in any way.
No.
Do you want to say anything about your sort of background and the influences it might have had?
Very little, really. I mean, I was born in Cardiff because my father went to work for his father, who was living in Wales at the time, and when I was 5 and my brother was 4, we came back to London, and I lived there until 10 years ago when I went up to work at the Royal London College of Music in Manchester. So I consider myself a Londoner, and so it's all very easy now. It's just 2 hours on the train, so it's not so much of a problem. But no, I mean, that was just a sort of happy accident due to my parents' work and living situation. So I think the Welsh bit can be milked for the odd Arts Council grant, but that's about as far as it goes.
Do you consider yourself to be a British composer or an English composer or just composer?
Just somebody who writes music, I think. Really. Yes, I mean, 2 generations ago, my name was Gorbulevsky, and we were Russian Jews. So I don't know whether I can consider myself that British, really, but I suppose I am British. Born in Cardiff, lived in London, but you know, both sides of my family come from what was the Ukraine. And a certain amount of that comes in later. I can talk about that a bit later if you like.
Sure. Right. Your biography, the one I wrote anyway, says that you were composing actively at the age of 10, and the first work that you had broadcast on national radio was when you were 15. At what stage can you take yourself back to your earliest beginnings Can you think why, what you composed, what made you think I'm going to write music, and what was the first piece that you still own up to?
Oh gosh, well, I was having piano lessons, and I had quite a good teacher who introduced me, got me away from all those horrible little sort of twee pieces that one did. And I remember looking at sort of Bartok, Mikrokosmos, and there was a sort of revelatory piece called Melody in the Mist from Volume 4, where instead of having to play polite C major chords, I could actually just sort of go plonk on the white and the black notes. And I thought that was, it's nice to be allowed to do that. And I started writing lots of piano pieces. And my very first attempt, I think I wrote a piece called Dances from Different Countries, where I think I had certain ideas of what Africa or Antarctica or Siberia or South America. So I did loads of countries and I had no clue what they were like, but I just used one dance after another. This was about the age of 11. Then a few years later, I wrote this piece called A Pianist's Alphabet. Well, so 26 pieces, one beginning with each letter in the alphabet. And my composition teacher, I'd started having lessons, said why not send them to the BBC and see what happens. And they actually got, a selection of them got chosen, and 5 of them were played on Radio 3 a few years later when I was 18. And I was writing furiously. I wrote 2 orchestral pieces which will stay in a cupboard and never come out as long as I'm alive. And on my deathbed I will sort of take a match to them. And so...
Don't have to be paid anywhere near it.
Yeah, so I mean I just... I was just writing all the time while other people were sort of watching telly and going into discos. And so I was really, really quite fluent until about the age of 18. And then really after that I sort of stopped and suddenly realised that I didn't really like what I'd been writing. And the mood at the time, this we're talking about the late 1970s, I went to Cambridge University, which may not have been the right thing for me at the time. The mood was very much post-Schoenberg, Webern, serialism. That was the direction that music in this country seemed to be. New music seemed to be that sort of area. Anything else was not known so well. I did more composition when I was at university. I got some pieces performed, but I sort of rather lost confidence in myself a bit and veered towards lighter music. I was an early starter, but I've been a very, very late developer. And so in my 20s, I moved towards working in the theatre. I became from about 1980 when I graduated, I became a freelance musician, playing the piano for opera companies, ballet companies, doing sort of rehearsal pianist for musicals, playing the odd cabaret stuff. I was never a great jazz pianist, but I could sort of make things up as I went along. And sort of did lots of musicals, and it was very much in that world, and didn't really miss composing very much. I think what I say to students now is the point about composing is you've really, really got to want to do it 100% because nobody's going to miss you if you're not there. There's enough great music around already, so another composer, we're not needed. We just have to try and persuade people that we might be needed in some way, but as far as the general perception in the world is that new music isn't really needed. So in my first half of my 20s, I didn't really write music very much. So I'll come on to my first example now, if that's all right.
I was going to say, this interest in theatre music, did it have a sort of a liberating influence, or any sort of influence, or can you give us a taste of what you were doing?
Yeah, and there's one piece that I wrote, which in sort of the mid-1980s, and I was only writing very spasmodically then. I'd actually got a job at a drama college doing music and training actors to sort of doing singing, vocal coaching and all that sort of world, and quite a bit of arranging. But I wrote a piece which was a companion piece to Walton's Facade, and it's called Hymns Uproarious, and it sets the poems of John Betjeman. It's very much the same sort of idea of speaking with an instrumental background. The instrumentation is the same instrumentalists as one would find in Facade, so it's, as I say, it's a companion piece. It's in quite a sort of light, if you like, pseudo-1930s idiom, and very much, if you like, on the lines of Facade. But on that level, I'm quite pleased with the piece. So this is, if we go for track 26, this is a poem called Sun and Fun. I think it's called Sun and Fun, but anyway, but let's just play a bit of this.
My head my chin. I have not now the joys I had when I was young in sin. I run my fingers down your dress with grandly certain aim, and you respond to my address and make it feel the same. But I've a picture of my own on this reunion night, wherein two skeletons are shown to hold each other tight. Dark sockets look on emptiness, which once was loving eye. The mouth that opens for a gift has got no tongue inside. I cling to you in flameless fear, as now you cling to me. I feel how frail you are, my dear, and wonder what will be. A week or 20 years remain, and then what kind of death? A losing fight with frightful pain, or a gasping fight for breath?
The last note, but don't worry. Yeah, okay, that's right. So that's the sort of kind of world that I was in at that point in the mid-1980s. So that CD was made a few years later with actually Benjamin Luxon. That was he was doing that. Yeah.
Okay. So, what did you see yourself doing at that point? I mean,
I was in my 20s.
Being a composer.
Well,
I remember the wonderful story about Putnam writing to Auden and saying, I'd like to be a poet, can you give me any suggestions? And Auden writing back and saying, well, I'll give you some tips and ideas and techniques about writing poetry, but as to being a poet, I've no idea what that means.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, first of all, you can't just be a composer unless you've got a private income. I mean, it's there are perhaps enough composers in this country who earn a living just from composing. There's about 4 or 5, and they do a lot of commercial stuff. I mean, I have a full-time job now at the Royal Northern College of Music, which is a great job, training composers and telling them they're not going to make a living when they finish. So one doesn't do it for great reward, and I never thought that in the first place anyway. But I suppose in the end, after a while, I had a few idle years when I first started after university, but I felt really one has to work for a living. One gets out of life what one puts into it. And I was always working. I was working in the theatre. I had one job at one point for a whole year playing keyboards in the West End, some terrible show, but it was quite good money. As I said before, I worked at a drama college for 5 years, just about full time, involved there. And then in 1986, 1987, I heard a piece of Paul Patterson's on the radio, and I got in touch with him and said, well, he lived quite near me in North London. I said, well, I still think I want to be a composer, I'm not sure, and could I come and show you some of my stuff, and could you give me a lesson? And I went round to his house, and he was very encouraging, and so I started seeing him occasionally, and just showing him pieces that weren't necessarily going to get a performance. I was still very much out of the mainstream. I wasn't really following what was happening in new music that much. I was occasionally going to things, but not to an enormous extent. And after a few years, Paul said, well, look, it'll be a very good idea. If you really want to do this, and I think you do, you should come back to be a student again. I mean, I've been to Cambridge, got a degree, but I thought, really, and I would say this to any compositions, any person who wants to be a composer now, to have any chance, normally you will have to go through one of the music colleges because that's where you make the contacts, that's where there's the environment, that's where it's all happening. So I spent a certain amount of money at a certain point putting a few pieces of mine on a demo, in those days cassette, and including that piece, Hymns Are Glorious, and about 2 or 3 other pieces. So I invested in a demo cassette, and possibly on the strength of that, I got a place to do the master's course in the at the Royal Academy of Music in 1991. I was over 30 by then, and I was as I say, a late developer. And but I think it's rather nice being a student when you're a bit older because you don't have sort of hang-ups of, oh gosh, I'm leaving home for the first time, and it was all rather scary, and how am I going to prove myself? I mean, I just realised I had a lot of catching up to do, and when I got into this sort of environment with about 20 other composers, and I thought, my goodness, most of them are 10, even more years younger than me, and they're so much better than me. I've got a lot of catching up to do. So I think it's in that time that I developed very, very quickly. I felt I just needed to sort of make up for lost time. So I worked awfully hard because I think when you're a student, when you're older, you're there because you really, really want to be, rather than just drifting into it. So, I had a very, very rewarding time there. And made contacts and met you for the first time when I was there.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
This is quite true. Having sort of Paul Patterson and Liz Booth's sort of an inescapable part of your life.
Yes.
And that is, I'd say, your catalogue is you've been active in lots of genres, but if anybody looking at your catalogue, one thing that jumps out at you is a high proportion of pieces for wind bands and wind ensembles. In fact, in lots of people's minds, that's all you do. Because there are these sort of parallel universes, and wind bands is one of them, and they have these wonderful conferences and people get together and play things, and they have clinics and they have arguments, and there's one group of people who think that music is a thing where musicians learn their instruments and techniques in order to perform music, and there's the other half who think that music is something that exists to give people things to do on Thursday evenings, and each one considers the other to be the sport. This is particularly true in bands who consider it to be a sort of a social force rather than an art form. And they just, not only do they not agree, they don't even agree that the other one has a right to exist. But there are these parallel universes, I say called wind band. In fact, there are 2 parallel universes. And a very large proportion of your catalogue is made up of these pieces. And yet you sort of fell into it almost by accident, it seems to me.
Well, yeah, I'd say, first of all, I mean, it's great to write for wind ensemble because that's where the work is. That's where there are commissions. I'll say right now that I still write pieces without a commission occasionally because I want to try and extend myself. I've just written a piano piece for the head of keyboard where I work because I like the way he plays and I wanted to write a piano piece. But back in '92, Paul Patterson, there was a big festival coming up at the Academy of Music.
The Da Capo Festival.
Da Capo Festival,
By
yes.
living and recently dead, well, let's just say, it took a long time to set up. When they started planning the programme, several composers were still alive who weren't actually still alive by the time the festival took place. But when it started, anyway.
Yeah. So yes, so I was asked to write a piece for the festival, which was, quite a big deal. The national newspapers were going to come along, and Paul advised me. He said, well, you could write an orchestral piece. If you write an orchestral piece, it'll get played, it'll get recorded, and then it'll probably never get played again, because who else is going to play it? I mean, orchestras much rather play Brahms, Mahler, Tchaikovsky, Debussy, Beethoven, etc. New pieces, if they're very, very lucky, 1 in 100 new pieces will get several performances. If you're lucky, it'll get a performance and a recording or a second performance. Most of them get 1 performance. I've written pieces for symphony orchestras that have had 1 performance. I don't regret having done it, but that's the way things are. So I was advised, well, why don't you write a piece for wind band? As a clarinetist, a very bad clarinetist, I played in wind bands when I was at school, and we used to play show tune arrangements, TV themes, occasional pieces by Holst and Vaughan Williams if we were very lucky, but there was really not a situation where there were interesting new pieces being written for wind ensemble, as far as I knew. Somebody told me about a gentleman called Timothy Rainish, who at that time was the head of School of Wind and Percussion, where I now work, at the Royal Northern College of Music. And he'd made it his life's mission to try and create a repertoire of interesting new pieces for wind band. And so this piece, which I wrote in the end, it was premiered in March 1993, called Metropolis. Tim came down and listened to it, and I think you were probably at the concert. It was conducted by Edward Gregson, who was working at the Academy at the time. He became the principal of the Royal Northern College of Music later, and so I got to know him, and so that probably helped when I was interviewed for the job just over 10 years ago. So it was rather an important moment. I mean, I suppose composers talk about an important day in their lives, and I think it was the 8th of March. 8th of March 1993.
When music, Metropolis. It was the 8th of March 1993.
That's right, yeah. Well, I remember because, my wife came along, she was heavily pregnant with our first child. I mean, he was kicking around all the way through the performance. And so it got a very successful performance, and through that it won a couple of competitions, one in this country, one in America, and it was performed up in Manchester. And it's not been one of my most performed pieces because it's actually very difficult to play, and it's for the sort of audience that goes to a wind ensemble concert. It's reasonably cutting edge. It's not Harrison Birtwhistle. I mean, but on the other hand, it's not John Rutter. And so maybe perhaps we could just play the beginning of Metropolis now.
Can I just say,
Yes,
before you immediately jump in, I can say that the great thing about this, it isn't actually a wind band piece. It is a piece that happens to be, it's not a piece for wind band that happens to be by Adam, it's a piece for Adam that happens to be a wind band. Most wind band music is written by people who grow up in the medium, play in the medium, and replicate what they've heard before. What the medium needs and what it got in this was an entirely new. I mean, you probably never heard of wind bands when you were up.
Well, I played in them, but
but not as serious vehicles. I mean,
not really. No. They were sort of community things that were just for people who weren't good enough to get into the orchestra.
So you were sort of approaching it from the point of view of legitimate composition rather than giving something to people.
Well, I thought this is the Royal Academy of Music. They're going to have fantastic players. I'm not going to compromise. So it's just the first track. I mean, I feel the wind band is actually a very urban, large combination of instruments. There are no strings, just one double bass is the only string instrument. There's a piano, as well as all the wind and brass and percussion in the orchestra, and a saxophone quartet. So it actually contains all the instruments that you'll find in a big band, a big jazz band, as well as the more conventional, if you like, marching band from which the wind band came. So, you know, so as I say, it's a tough piece to play that, but some of the American bands have played it. It's been played in Japan and Germany and Switzerland, as well as this country. Because, you know, as I've said before, I mean, people want new wind ensemble pieces. I think the same is with brass bands. I've written one brass band piece. And so there is scope for a piece entering a repertoire, which I think, as a composer, that's what interests me. That I think Benjamin Britten said he wanted to be useful as a composer, and I like the idea of my music being of use in some way. It doesn't just get done once and then there's no more use for it after that.
Right, that's fine. Now, how many wind band pieces have you written now? 25?
Nearly 30. Yeah. I mean, of those 30, I'd say that about 7 of them are serious pieces.
Really? Yes.
I've written about another 8 or 9, possibly, that are, one could say, are light pieces. I like writing light music. I don't see any problem in it. I think that if people want that, I'll try and give it to them. And I mean, there are some other composers who would quite legitimately say, well, I don't do that kind of thing. I mean, personally, I don't do electronic music. It doesn't interest me. I can see why it should interest other people. I don't want to write film music. You know, there's certain things I feel that I probably will never do and I don't have a particular passion for. But I do like the idea of light concert music. So I've got certain wind ensemble pieces. The two most, there's one called Away Day and one called Yiddish Dances that have had thousands of performances all around the world, and they pay for the holidays, you know, so the royalties. And so, and I feel I quite enjoy that. I mean, as long as if people want to get to know me a bit better as a composer, I'll say yes, well as yes, you know, Yiddish Dances, yes, I know you know that, but actually I do write more serious pieces, and I think that it's, you know, the wind band can merit that. I've also written about 15 more pieces that are simpler pieces aimed at school bands at various levels, and I find that quite a nice challenge to be able to write much simpler music that is hopefully still interesting to play and still has a bit of personality, if you like. That's quite challenging.
The great Raymond Chandler, as I would say, once wrote in a letter that a writer's ambition should be to produce something that a broad public can get hold of and understand and follow, and at the same time be good writing.
Yeah.
The medium is almost immaterial. But if the quality is there, it will somehow filter down, unseen by the person who's listening to it, and give them a more satisfying and rewarding experience than had it been the same thing. There wasn't good writing.
Yeah.
So I think in the wind band, you're sort of like a round peg in a round hole, if you like. It fits you, or
I think it does. I think it does. I mean, I suppose, you know, that's why people perhaps want to keep asking me to write for wind band.
That's another good reason for doing it.
Well, it is, yes. I mean, although I wouldn't want to be stereotyped. I've just written a big piece for wind band, which is happening in St John Smith Square in March, and I know I've got another one coming up next year. But I'm very, very keen to do other things at the same time as well. But going back to your point about the Raymond Chandler point, I don't see any point in writing something that people aren't going to understand, because I write what I can understand, and I like to think that I want to share that experience with as many people who care to listen.
But equally, there's no point in writing garbage just because people won't understand it if it's better. People will not appreciate it being better than garbage if it is. You've still got yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't. I mean, the one area of music I don't like is minimalism. Because I feel that it's a very easy way of writing, particularly with the advent of the computer and Sibelius software. I mean, it's quite easy just to play in an arpeggio or a scale and a drum beat and then press the repeat key and go copy, 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 copy. And I just look at a lot of sort of prospective student scores and I can see cut and paste written all over them. And the music is sort of, for perhaps 2 seconds, sounds effective, and then it gets boring. And I think that just doesn't interest me.
As a publisher, you see even more of this. You see 30 scores a week dropping through, and you can see how the technology has affected their ability to write or style.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a piano, pencil and paper person. I mean, totally, all the time, always will be.
Now, important as this is, I don't really want to dwell in, because sort of equally important, I suspect, to you, are your sort of music for theatre and your concert pieces, and your pieces for dance.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an area of theatre that I think it matters to you a lot. There's one piece in particular that really made a great impact. It had a great deal of exposure, Carl Simcoe's.
Yeah.
Which I personally thought was a tremendous score. And perhaps you'd like to tell us something about that. 'Cause I think it's a key piece. And if I were drawing up a list of key Gorb pieces, that would be there.
Well, it's I really enjoyed doing this one because I really like the idea of music getting out to audiences who don't normally go to contemporary music concerts. And this was a commission, and this came through being at the Academy. The conductor and sort of music director Mark Stevenson, who runs a group called Open Musici, came into the Academy and asked three of us to write for something else, a different context. And then on the strength of that, he encouraged me to apply for the job of composer-in-residence of the Rambert Company. I applied and didn't get it. So I thought, fair enough, that's the end of that. But he said, well, I think I can still get you a commission out of it. And so I don't know whether it was the very last minute, but I had about 4 months to write what was a folkloristic ballet score. Kol Simcha is Hebrew for the voice of joy, or the voice of celebration. And at this time of my life, this was about 1994 I wrote the piece, I was starting to get curious about my roots, my musical roots. So it takes a bit of time. I mean, I still had 2 grandfathers at that point who I used to talk to a lot, and I think sometimes it skips a generation being interested in your past, and I'd sort of slightly regret that we don't have such a strong folk tradition here now. Of course, it was stronger a couple of generations ago in Britain, but it seems to have been dissipated through the splicing up of popular and classical music. So, but I mean, I started listening to a lot of klezmer music and Yiddish music, which I thought this is my kind of folk music. It's funny, it's tragic, it's laughing in the face of catastrophe, it's ironic, it takes the mickey out of itself. I like the instruments that are used, I like the contours of the melodies. So I wrote a sort of klezmer ballet for an ensemble of instruments which you'd find possibly typically in a typical Jewish wedding or bar mitzvah, or you used to find. So there were 2 clarinets, and one of the clarinetists is actually my second cousin, a clarinetist called Merlin Shepherd, who is a folk clarinetist, so I wrote a part for him. A lot of it actually, some of it wasn't written down, he just learned it by ear and he improvised certain bits of it. So there's 2 clarinets, a trumpet, trombone, percussion, accordion, 2 violins, double bass. I'm very fond of instruments that don't go together very well, which is why I found writing a brass band very difficult, because it's a bit too homogeneous for my liking. I like instruments that where I've got to struggle to try and make it work. I mean, I find it quite an interesting challenge, for example, to write, say, piccolo and tuba. I quite like the thought of doing a piece for those 2 instruments. I even did a piece for tuba and piano, where the piano has to be a tuba, and it only plays 1 note at a time, and it only plays in the tuba's register. And for me, that's quite a nice sort of argument, which the limitations of that get me going. So Kol Simcha. So it's quite influenced, it's very obviously influenced by Yiddish folk music. There are dances called the Freilachs, Doina, Bulgar, Turkish. Let's try the Turkish. I mean, I don't know what the tracks are on this. If I have a look. So it's probably, where are we? With family here, yeah. No, sorry, I think it's this one now. Okay. Sorry about that. It's going to be about track 9, if they're on track. It's just, I'll know when I look up there. Okay. It's there. Just loading. Okay, no problem. And this was performed by the Rambert, and it went on tour around the country. I went to America, and it's rather nice. No, let's try track 10. It's a sort of fast up-tempo Jewish tango. So that was doing the rounds in sort of 1996, 1997, and it was great. So it was nice to sneak into performances that unnoticed, and people were totally sort of unprejudiced about it because they were looking at the dance and the musicians were on stage, and it all made a very convincing whole. So yeah, that's called Simcoach.
Now, we've seen quite a variety of styles, but like what I see in common is a sort of clarity of scoring and a sort of cleanness of imagination and great drive and energy.
Yeah.
A composer colleague of yours, when you were talking about a piece of yours, he was involved in Weimar, said the great thing about Adam, he can really write good, extended, convincing, fast music. I don't know anybody else around who can do that at the moment. Right.
Well, it's hard work. I mean, it's and I mean, there's a problem with fast music that it's going to sound like other people's fast music, or it's going to sound like jazz or minimalism or Bartok or Shostakovich. And I think there's always an issue there that I mean, somehow there's a lot of students at various colleges. It's perhaps rather easier to be able to create an atmosphere or to write something brooding or depressing. And I mean, I write lots of slow music as well. I'll probably play some in a minute. But yes, I think to be able to sort of, after all, most music in the early part of the 20th, in the early part of the 19th century was fast. Music got slower through the 19th century, and then composers like Bartok and Stravinsky speeded it up again. I think, so I think we've lost a certain sort of energy, and the way we move and live is fast, and I think one should reflect that.
Do you consider yourself to be sort of part of any particular tradition? Any sort of musical or stylistic or intellectual tradition? Or do you just do the biz and I
just write what I feel like? I don't know. I mean, I'm not anything-ist. I don't think I'm in any particular school. I sometimes notice if other composers are sympathetic to what I do, or I'm sympathetic to what they do. I have particular loves and likes and dislikes, but I suppose in the 21st century it's that much more difficult to talk about any tradition now. Or I don't think, perhaps it's not up for me to say, somebody else to say it.
Well, I can sort of see various traces and influences of things on you, but they're very superficial.
Yeah. Yes, I hope so.
A turn of phrase here, a little harmonic progression there, but it's nothing fundamental.
Yeah. I'd hope not. I mean, I think so, and I mean, having said that, of course, I mean, I try and listen as much as possible and try and draw upon what I love and reject what I don't like, and sometimes, as Britten used to do when he was composing in the mornings, he used to play Brahms because he hated Brahms so much, he just got inspired to write stuff as unlikely as possible. So there are ways of, getting inspired.
Yes, well, because of forces beyond our control, we are running a little bit late. I feel that the picture of your stylistic panorama is not complete. We haven't heard what you might call a conventional concert piece.
Right.
Do you have one of those?
Yeah. Well, there's probably two more pieces.
Can we do a bit of the
Yeah, well, there's a piece for oboe and harp. There's a little link between the last piece. The trombonist on Kolsimka was David Purser, who's married to Melinda Maxwell, who was the oboist I wrote the next piece for. This is a piece called Freedom. This wasn't a commission, I just wanted to do it. I wanted to write a piece for Melinda because she's a fantastic player, and I knew I was going to get the most incredible performance. She put it on a CD, and with the harp, with the harpist, I thought oboe and harps, again a nice duet because they really don't go together, they've got issues with each other. And this is, if you like, in my more esoteric idiom. I'd listened to the Barrio Sequenza for oboe, and Melinda had given me some ideas of certain multiphonics, that's playing more than one note at a time on an instrument, and I thought, well, I'll use it discreetly in this piece, but hopefully structurally, not just as a funny effect coming along. So this piece, Freedom, I just wrote it by hand. I didn't put it onto the computer afterwards. I wrote it in a way that I think it'd be quite difficult to put it on a computer. And it's a 9-minute piece. It's never going to get done very much. I mean, I hope it gets done one more time in my lifetime, and I'll be quite pleased. I just sort of wrote it for myself, really. And but I'm lucky enough to have it on a CD, so people can listen to it. I can play it to people. So if a great oboist comes along one day, I will thrust it into their hand and say, please, if you're interested. So this is track 2, just at the end of a few minutes.
great piece.
Well, it's so well played. What a player! I mean, that's about as avant-garde as I get. I don't think I can hear more avant-garde than that. I mean, if I was to sort of go further, I wouldn't be honest.
It wouldn't be you.
It wouldn't be me, and I wouldn't hear it.
You'd be the existential person, I mean.
Well, yeah.
Excoriating earlier on.
Well, no, but if others want to do that, it's great. You know.
Well, I think we ought to sort of wrap it up by sort of bringing these together.
Yes.
I mean, sort of your medium of choice, if you like, the wind band, and your idea of opposites competing with each other.
Yes.
I think the piece, not quite the most recent, but it's the most recent prize-winning piece, isn't it?
Right. Yes.
Well, that was which had these sort of two competing sound. Well, it's got these two. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, this is a piece that Tim Reinish, who I mentioned before, he commissioned this, and it was written originally for the National Youth Wind Ensemble of Wales. So I think the Welsh connection was used to get me a commission in that way. So, but I mean, it was then performed by the RNCM Wind Ensemble. They're a fantastic wind ensemble, and I'm sort of, I suppose this could be a plug because I've got a CD of my stuff coming out later this year of four pieces of mine, of which this is going to be the first piece. I mean, I think we should probably start with a work called Farewell rather than End. And the idea comes from Haydn's Farewell Symphony, where some people might know at the end of the piece, the instrumentalists all walk off, leaving two violinists to play. In this particular piece, I actually have two separate wind ensembles, a sort of aggressive Type A personality type wind ensemble, which is clarinets, trumpets, trombones, non-pitched percussion, piano, on the other side, and saxophones. On the other side, more calm, reflective, tranquil Type B instruments, flutes, oboes, bass clarinet, bassoons, horns, and pitched percussion like Celeste. And so the piece starts off just with Type A sort of music, Type B music, and they're separated from each other. Then the first ensemble is led by a clarinet, the second ensemble is led by an oboe. Gradually their type of music comes together, and eventually climaxes in a great big D minor cadence. And for the first 3/4 of the piece, I only use 10 notes. Again, I'm trying to give myself restrictions here. I don't use C or F sharp at all. At the big climax, C and F sharp come in very, very softly in the background, and then they stay there as a sort of drone all the way through the rest of the piece. Both bands just start playing C and F sharp. The clarinet and the oboe walk to the front and lament, I suppose, together. So it's rather than getting all the other instrumentalists to walk off, which would cause clatter and people dropping mutes and falling over music stands, I think it would be better to actually just have two players to come to the front. I do like the theatrical element of music. So here's the first few minutes of Farewell. What track is it? I've forgotten.
It's on the disc.
Is it? It's...
It's the...
Yeah, go for it. And... Yeah. And certain influences from Yiddish folk music is there as well. Well, I don't think there was. Well, it's
You don't approach it from that angle at all.
No, I mean, I try to restrict myself. I think because we don't work with the obvious limitations that classical romantic composers had, and the line of musical language being broken about 100 years ago, I think we have to invent our own limitations. And I think you lay down the groundwork and you think, well, how am I going to sort of work within this confined space? And I think that's what helps me.
Well, just before we throw the discussion open house, I'd just like to say, assuming you have got no limitations at all, a rich patron, Lord Howard of Walden, say, comes along and says, you don't have to work in your, I would like to give you enough money to write whatever piece you would like to write, and I will then pay for it to be put on, as he did to Holbrook. You want to write an opera? I'll book Dickish and the film and we'll do it. What would you do? What is your great unfulfilled ambition that you would do if there were no limitations?
Well, I'd probably be lazy to start off with, because I tend to live off my nerves and work to a deadline.
It has to be ready by next September.
That's better, thank you. Yes, that's more like it. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't. I do an opera.
Right.
I do an opera, I think, yeah. I mean, I want to write an opera. I'd like to write more vocal music. I'd like to write a song cycle. I'd like to write more choral music. I'm doing a big choral piece next. The next big wind ensemble piece I'm writing is actually with chorus, and it's for the Royal Marines plus the Exeter Cathedral Chorus, an oratorio based on the Afghanistan, the war in Afghanistan. The librettist Ben Kay, who I've worked with already. I did a piece with him based on the imprisonment of John McCarthy a couple of years ago. And so we're doing another piece now, which is going to be done in Exeter Cathedral at the end of the year. But yeah, an opera would be nice. More chamber music. I mean, more the kind of music where I can work with the musicians very closely. We can sort of talk and go out for a drink afterwards, and it's a very intimate thing. I mean, but then on the other hand, having said that, I think it's the challenge of not knowing what's going to be next, and somebody just saying, please do this. That's what perhaps excites me most. Although, if it was just, yes, another piece for wind ensemble, another piece, I might sort of think, please give me another opportunity somewhere else.
So your reply would be, I'm the wrong man to ask.
Yes, yeah. I do most things. You know, I mean, there are certain instruments. I have a problem with the organ. It's my problem. I wasn't an organ scholar at university. I find it a forbidding, strange instrument. I have a problem with the guitar, because I don't know enough about it. I did one piece for 2 guitars once. I need to do another piece for guitar to try and get it right this time. So I think it's probably the duty of the composer to try and write for everything. I mean, as I said before, there are certain areas, film, multimedia, electronics, which are not for me. They're for other people who will put in the time, put in the studio hours in the way that I never would. I don't like working in rooms with no windows. You know. So, but I'll do most things.
Well, we've got a rather truncated period for throwing it open, but does anybody...
Yeah, one small question. I wonder if you could go into more detail about when you were working with a dancer, about the sort of process of collaborating with someone to produce the show.
Well, I mean, it was great. I mean, I was, as it were, given a choreographer, a woman called Dee Dee Veldman, who's gone on to make a very successful career as a choreographer. Really, in this situation, I mean, there wasn't much time. I looked at some Rambert shows, even I think a couple of videos at the time, but really I just had to go away and write the music. And there wasn't much of an opportunity to sort of watch the dancers rehearse. I know Stravinsky used to watch the dancers, he used to watch dance classes. I used to play for classes a lot in early work. I did a little bit of work with what was then the Sadler's Wells Ballet at one point. And I think it's always very rewarding, I think, for a composer to work with other creative people who are not musicians, and you get a different take on it, and they have different ideas. I mean, in teaching, I learn a lot from my students, and in working with other creative people. I mean, I've been working with Ben Kay, for example, who is a poet and librettist. I get ideas from him. Composing is very lonely, and I like working with other people, and as much as possible working with other musicians, with dancers where possible. But in this particular instance, I mean, I'd love to write another ballet. I'd love to write any music involving dance. In this instance, I really went away and wrote what I thought was hopefully quite a buoyant, rhythmic, life-affirming score, and I just gave it to the choreographer, got on with it, and there was not much more I could do with it after that, because it was set and I just had to put up with it.
You didn't have any views on what she should be doing with the choreography?
Well, there were a couple of things, yes. At one point, there was a lament, a Hebrew lament called El Mol Rachamim, which is part of the piece, which was sung by a boy in a concentration camp. And this is anecdotal, I think. And I think the officer, good Nazi, was so moved by the way the boy sang, he managed to smuggle him out of the concentration camp. There's a particular joke, there's a particular story about that. And the way it was choreographed, I felt I wasn't sure, and I asked her, I had a word with her, and, as tactfully as I could to try and change certain implications, but I didn't have much say in it apart from that.
I wondered about something you said quite early on relating to piano lessons, and suddenly you found there was a piece where you were playing both the choirs and the back together. The way you framed that was interesting to me, that often you were allowed to do that peculiar seeming physical thing of playing all the white keys and black keys together. Is that actually something which consciously or otherwise drives you in composing? The sheer, I'm allowed to do this?
Yeah, definitely. I think one should always be, in my view, I like to be fighting against something. And at that particular time of my life, I was a kid, and I'd been playing simple pieces of Mozart and Beethoven, and much less well-known composers have probably faded away by now, the sort of people that used to write sight-reading associated board pieces, and they change every generation probably, and it's not very exciting music, so I was playing a bit of that. And I have an enormous amount of respect for composers who can write interesting, simple music, like Bartók. His Mikrokosmos, his children's pieces, and of course, well, when my son used to play the violin, he doesn't play so much now, he played through some of the Bartók duos. And I think to be able to still be yourself and write very simple music, and it was a liberating experience, and to sort of feel that the rules were being broken in quite an exciting way. Because I think one needs to have rules to break them. I think, if it's just one great big free-for-all, one loses that sort of sense of excitement in going somewhere new. Because, I suppose there's always the argument, I know Mahler and Brahms probably spoke of this together in the 1890s, that everything is being done now, what else can you do? And people have always said this, and I think they probably always will. And I feel that we always need to try and sort of look for new things. But now the perception is that new isn't necessarily incredibly complex or incredibly clever machinations of 12-tone rows the way it probably was 30 or 40 years ago. New is something different now, and it's quite hard to put your finger on it when you're here in the here and now. But I do think that, you should find some sort of convention and then try and do something different within that convention, rather than just trying to be different too much, or you'll never finish the piece.
And perhaps the being allowed part of that is to do with confidence of self-expression as well. Once you realise that actually this arena is allowed, and it's allowed because I'm realising, discovering, redrawing rules. I have rules, I have limits, but I'm allowed to do this because these rules are there. Maybe that's what gives you that, or part of that confidence to express what it is that you're expressing in that.
Yeah, well, I had quite a lot of confidence when I was very young, but I lost it when I went to university. I felt that I wasn't really, it was probably my fault as well as anybody. I didn't push myself enough, and I didn't want to do it enough, so I went in other directions. But I think between about the ages of 18 and 27, I didn't want to do it enough. I went through probably what could be called a delayed and lengthy compositional adolescence. And I was like a sort of self-conscious, spotty composer, and at that time I just didn't want to sort of push the boundaries the way I thought, I possibly could do later on. And in part of what I do now, working with young composers, is to try and give them the confidence that because so many people, every week a young composer will come up and see me and say, God, I'm so terrible, everybody else is so good. And I'll just have to say, look, somebody else came to see me a few days ago with exactly the same. You're you. You know, you've got to find out what you're good at. I mean, and what you can offer. Just because you're not writing music like that person and you wouldn't want to write music like that person, doesn't mean that you're intrinsically worse than that person. You've got to sort of go for what you do, and you'll be respected if you follow that. Yeah?
Can I ask you a real basic question? Do you think that when people who begin having composition lessons at the very beginning, do you think it's essential to copy older styles, or do you think that
You copy.
older styles, like for example, counterpoint, Moroccan point, Mozart, and should go through development?
I don't teach composition at a very early level. I mean, no, I don't think you should. I mean, I think that that's more stylistic, if you like, called stylistic pastiche composition, which might be useful if you've got a real yen to write film music or TV music. I don't think there are certain schools of education, not so much in this country. I think composition education is pretty good in this country. But in other countries they say, right, for the first year you just do Bach fugues, you do Mozart, then you do Beethoven. There's nothing wrong. I think doing counterpoint and harmony exercises is great. I don't think there's enough of that around. But I think just to then sort of carry on and start trying to ape other styles, there's a certain point where you have to think, well, no, you've got to stop doing this now, and you've got to listen to that music, look at it, analyse it, get to know it, but find out where you are. And it's so important just to listen to 20th century music, to listen to music that's around you now, and decide what you like, decide what you don't like, because there'll be a lot what you don't like, as well as hopefully something that one likes as well. But, you know, I suppose sometimes, I mean, if I suddenly decided I wanted to write a piece in the style of Mozart tomorrow, I might well do that, but I don't think I will. And I don't think it's, for techniques of composition for a young composer, I think it's better for them to, you know, talk and just do more pure manipulation of notes. But then I think the only technique you really need to know as a composer is how to write stuff that players want to play, how to write music that sounds how you want it to sound on a flute or a trombone or a piano or something. That's the only technique a composer really needs to know. And all the other isms and schools of theory, interesting, but you don't necessarily need to follow them. Yeah.
What about writing things that players don't want to play in the name of developing what an instrument can do? And otherwise, how would the repertoire as we know it develop?
Well, I totally agree with that, except hopefully, in the end, players will want to play it. You know, because after all, when Stravinsky wrote the beginning of the Rite of Spring, I mean, the bassoonist couldn't play the top C, and then Stravinsky said, that's all right, because every 10 years I'm going to transpose it up a semitone. You know, and absolutely, I totally agree with that. I think it's very important, as well as writing what is sympathetic for instruments, what is exciting for instruments, what extends them and stretches them, and then to be told by the instrumentalist, no, they really can't do that. I think that's why it's great to be in an environment. Coming back to the music college thing, composers need to go through music college because that's where they will meet their peers, they will meet the best young musicians who are going to be in the business. And yes, go for it. I mean, what good musicians will say is, look, write what you want and I'll tell you whether I can play it or not afterwards. And then you've got to then work with the musician and say, well, maybe that doesn't work. I mean, what I'm really saying fundamentally is don't write for flute and the bass clef, certain things like that. Know the instruments, know what works, but then know what you might be able to push a little bit further. And I mean, this is why I'm so against certain sort of music technology programs that try and impersonate sounds of instruments. I think there's one called Vienna, which very expensive. And it's brilliant apparently. You can't tell the difference between the orchestral sounds and samples from the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. And you can't tell the difference. It's brilliant, but that's not the point. I'm not interested. I want to write for people. I want to write for people playing instruments. I think it's extraordinarily exciting watching a trumpet player trying to hit a high D and their face turns purple. It's the climactic point of Mahler symphonies. I mean, there's nothing more exciting. I mean, if I can just go and I get that sound without any strain, there's no expression.
It's like playing the open bassoon for the Rite of Spring on the piano. There's no tension.
There's no tension. No, it's Stravinsky wanted a very strange sound that nobody will have heard before. Is that a bassoon? It's this kind of strange, wailing, high, emotional sound, and the player, it's a certain tension. I think that's absolutely vital in writing. I mean, Chopin, when he wrote the second prelude in A minor, it actually hurts to play. the patterns. And I think Chopin meant it to, because it's supposed to be painful sounding music. So I think it's certainly pushing that direction. And but then, you know, if somebody then says, look, sorry, we can't play any of this, this were the players. Silly not to.
But lots of people said they couldn't play something like Unity Capture or the Sanders Dream song, Fernie piece from the 70s, and now there are a whole new generation of players who just play it for fun. Certain things develop and certain ideas take time to...
Yeah. I think you'll find there aren't that many players who play for fun.
Okay, not that many, but compared to at the time when everyone said absolutely not, no way.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah. It's the same thing. Although, I mean, I think there are certain pieces. I mean, Fernie Ho is an extreme example, and I think that I don't think he's a very good model, because I think you can go further than that. And he has a certain sort of reputation as somebody who writes that kind of music. There are certain people who play that, and play Richard Barrett, and play Chris Dench and Michael Finnessy, and they're very interesting. It's a certain kind of thing, and I know the vast majority of players will look at music like that, and they will not touch it. You know, and I know players who have played Fernie Ho and played that sort of music, and they just make it up as they go along, and the composer doesn't notice. That's not necessarily Fernie Ho, but there are other composers like that. And you know, I think you can go to a certain length, and I think composers should go further and further and further. But if it becomes like jungles of notes on a page, you know, and I think you'll find there still aren't that many players who are going to play that sort of stuff. Not in this country, might be in other countries. For example, Fernie Ho gets more music played abroad than here. How are we doing?
I just have one question, which the answer to the previous question raised in my mind. You mentioned that wind band music for you seemed to be urban music. I just wondered how, why, and whether part of that is to do with wanting to write for people, so
yeah, that's interesting. I never thought of that. I mean, well, Metropolis is a very urban sounding piece, and I've written another piece called Towards Nirvana, which starts in a very urban manner. But I've written a piece recently for a younger band called Tranquility, which I think is probably rather pastoral sounding. It's quite modal and quite slow and quite simple. And I think I'm a very urban person. I live in the countryside. I live in a small village in Cheshire, but I think I'm a Londoner or a big city person. I like Manchester as well. And you know, so I think the tension between urban and pastoral, between busy and lonely, I think is, you know, I'm inspired by contrast, by, you know, I suppose we can call it goes back to sonata form, musical argument. Active and passive, you know, that's what sort of, I'm inspired by structure, generally. For me, structure is all, keeping people interested through a sort of 20-minute, 10-minute, half-hour span. And I think if urban can be used as a certain sort of term for active, fast, violent, whatever, music, that interests me.
First, with elements as well.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, percussion concerto, that's it, yes.
As far as it gets.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yes, but I wouldn't want to repeat myself. No. Write the same kind of urban wind music that I've done before, or try not to.
Oh, I think we're over time. That's okay.